The late 2010s was a great time for both fans and developers of the Yakuza title, as not only did the series receive a ridiculous influx of Western blood looking to suckle on Yakuza's teat, but the Ryuga Gotoku team was also catering to that influx in the form of remakes and ports, while also continuing the mainline story for the OGs. As one of the new Western blood that came in during this time, I genuinely couldn't have been happier with how things progressed, as I literally got everything I could possibly want from the series. And the start of this was with another remake of the very next Yakuza game I had to play, called Yakuza Kiwami 2. Now, despite my less than stellar first time with Kiwami's gameplay, story-wise I was still hooked onto the series and wanted to know where Kiryu ended up next, especially so when I heard Yakuza 2 contained one of the series' best stories, and saw that the pants thief from Zero was involved in a seemingly prominent role. I ended up buying Kiwami 2 day one, hoping that my experience with it wouldn't mimic Kiwami's, and thankfully I was more or less right. At the time, despite having some glaring issues with Kiwami 2, I did have more fun initially with it than Kiwami. However, just like Kiwami, my opinions on Kiwami 2 would change. Nothing drastic, mind you. I mean, if I were to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say back then I had it at a 9, and over the years it dropped to an 8 or 7.5. It's not terrible by any stretch of the imagination, but there are a ton of small things that Kiwami 2 does that add up over time and makes playing the early parts of the game a chore and something I'd rather not experience again. Still, I can confidently say Kiwami 2 is a good game, and I'll be happy to sing its praises along with pointing out some flaws as I dive into Kiwami 2. Our story begins back in the 1980s, where a detective is seen cutting through a nightclub and entering an unmarked building, where some serious stuff is going down, as a man is gunned down in front of the detective by Kazuma. The man talks in an unfamiliar language, saying something about betrayal and passes out shortly after, causing Kazuma to move on to the next target. The detective rushes to the man's side, and with his last ounce of strength, the man tells him to save his wife and child who are currently in a burning building. The detective does so after literally slapping some sense into the suicidal woman, as we then flash forward to the present where we see the same detective preparing for something big to come his way. As we cut away from him, we head into Kamurocho, as we see Yuya beating off a handful of thugs as he wonders as the recent influx in punks in Kamurocho means that another war is about to go down. Unfortunately, Yuya's suspicion turns out to be correct. As we cut away from Yuya, we see Kashiwagi being informed of the fight that just went down at Stardust, to which he tells his men to leave it alone. As thanks to Tadada becoming the chairman of the Tojo clan, he knows that the Omi Alliance are looking for any excuse to start a war. When his subordinate leaves, Kashiwagi finds himself wondering how Kiryu would handle the situation if he were here, as he's too afraid to make a move on his own, fearing that he might be the spark that ignites the flame. And unbeknownst to Kashiwagi, his fears are given a lot of weight, as literally right under his nose, a bomber is making plans with his client to light up Kamurocho. The bomber being particularly into it, stating that he'll finally get vengeance for the souls who died in vain 20 years ago, to which the client tells him to shut up so he doesn't risk getting caught. Once the client hangs up, the bomber then continues on by saying that even a sea of flames won't be enough to put the souls that died in vain at ease. But to go back to Kashiwagi's earlier concern, he's not the only one who's wondering where the Dragon of Dojima went. As with a big war potentially coming up on the horizon, the question on everyone's mind is, where's Kiryu? And the answer is at home having a nightmare about last year's events, reminding himself of the friends and family he lost. As you can imagine, the events of last game still hold quite the strong grip around Kiryu's mind. Today being especially bad as it's the anniversary of their deaths, to which Kiryu alongside Haruka make a trip to visit their graves. While there, Tadada ambushes Kiryu and asks him for advice on what to do to prevent a war between the Tojo and the Omi. And Kiryu just doesn't care, brushing Tadada off like a side of broccoli he didn't order. I really appreciate how emotionally affected Kiryu is at the beginning of Kiwami 2 more than anything. Coming from Zero, which in retrospect provided a really flimsy reason as to why Kiryu would still be in the Dojima family after they killed his friends, I found it a really nice change of pace for Kiryu's character to start off the story as emotionally distant from the plot as he could get. Unfortunately for Kiryu, that distance is about to be shortened as a bunch of Omi Alliance members barge in looking to take Tadada's life, forcing Kiryu to get involved. While Kiryu is able to defeat most of them, Tadada gets shot meat shielding Kiryu from a bullet, getting hit right in the heart, and wasting no time to give Kiryu a peace treaty to deliver to Chairman Goda of the Omi Alliance, dying shortly after Kiryu calls an ambulance for him. Seeing Tadada die right in front of his face changes Kiryu's tune about helping the Tojo clan, as he drops everything and sends Haruka the Sunflower to inform them of what's going on. At Tojo HQ, not everyone is happy with the idea of peace after having the chairman of their organization slaughtered, but any and all arguments against peace are immediately shut down by the acting chairwoman Yayoi Dojima, the wife to Sohei Dojima. Yayoi is a pretty unique character in the Yakuza series, as she's one of the few important characters that don't get introduced in this game, but never appeared in a story important event in Kiwami. Now, don't misunderstand me, she was in Kiwami, but she only appeared in a sub-story where she was trying to kill Kiryu for killing Sohei, but Kiryu manages to survive her onslaught by promising her an explanation on who really killed Sohei when this is all over. Personally, I really don't like this kind of introduction because I ended up missing it entirely and lost out on a pretty important piece in her character, causing me to assume that she just didn't care about her husband when that was clearly not the case. Thankfully, Kiwami 2 only does it with her, so the rest of the characters you won't be missing out on any important moments. Kiryu makes it clear that no matter the response he gets, he's heading for Kansai, but before he leaves, he wants to appoint Yayoi's son, Daigo, to the seat of chairman, believing that he's the one who can guide the Tojo clan out of this current predicament. But, as Yayoi herself puts it, Daigo has been in a downward spiral ever since his father died, and heard that Kiryu was the quote-unquote murderer. Why is Kiryu so important to this equation? Well, it's because as a kid, Daigo idolized him, so to see his idol take out his father cut way deeper than it normally would have. It's hard to say if Daigo knows that Nishikiyama killed his father, but seeing as it's so far in the future, I don't think he cares who did it anymore, and rather drown his sorrows in alcohol. Even when he sees firsthand how pathetic Daigo is, Kiryu violently insists that he come back to the Tojo clan. After beating Daigo, Kiryu informs him that he's leaving for Kansai, which causes Daigo to switch gears, forcefully attaching himself to Kiryu's hip so that he can settle a grudge he has with the patriarch of the Goryeo clan, Ryuji Goda, who in events that took place before the story got Daigo arrested by having his men beat on Tojo officers, causing Daigo to get furious enough to come to Kansai armed. Which, when he did, he found out that Ryuji had already tipped the cops off to his arrival, getting him arrested on the spot. Once the two arrive in Kansai, they split up to enjoy themselves before they get down to business, and wouldn't you know it, Kiryu runs into Ryuji at the Grand, who's out causing a scene when one of his men referred to him by his nickname, the Dragon of Kansai. Truth be told, Ryuji actually likes the dragon part, but hates the fact that people have to specify which one they're talking about, believing that there should only be one dragon. Kiryu being Kiryu interrupts Ryuji's tantrum by digging in his heels and standing up for the poor sap that said Ryuji's nickname, causing a confrontation with Ryuji's men, which initiates my favorite cutscene in the whole game. He's so cool! After mopping the floor with his men, Ryuji tries to sweep the situation under the rug by buying Kiryu a drink and having proper introductions with him, which catches him off guard to hear that the Dragon of Dojima is in Kansai, that is until Kiryu gives him a lame excuse and says that he's someone else. Ryuji buys it and in the excitement tells Kiryu to keep his eye on Kamurocho tonight, as there will be a big firework going off to start the ceremony to the Dragon of Dojima's destruction. And wouldn't you know it, that conversation lasted up until midnight, giving Kiryu barely enough time to find a TV screen to see a bomb go off in Millennium Tower. Luckily, no one was inside the building when it happened, but nevertheless, Ryuji's threat level has been conveyed. The next day, Kiryu and Daigo go to meet the Omi Alliance, and things seem to be going well aside from some members of the Peanut Gallery making their opinions known. It should be noted that thanks to the Peanut Gallery managing to tick Daigo off, he brings up a really good point on how it's kind of asinine for the Tojo to believe that the Omi would be true to their word given the events of last game. But as Goto reveals, Ryuji was the sole patriarch of the Omi Alliance who was working alongside Jingu, and is likely to be the same person who ordered the hit on Terada. From there, the peace treaty talks go well, but just as Chairman Goda verbally agrees to the peace treaty, the lower ranking members of the Omi bust in staging a coup, all of which is headed by Ryuji, kidnapping Goto while giving both Kiryu and Daigo a headache. When Kiryu beats Ryuji, Ryuji asks why Kiryu won't finish him off, to which Kiryu replies by saying fighting Daigo weakened him and he wasn't in top performance so this fight doesn't count. Kiryu conveniently forgetting that he did the exact same thing in a building full of enemies, but I digress. Despite beating Ryuji and his men, Chairman Goda and now Daigo are kidnapped by foreigners speaking in that unfamiliar language from before, and to make matters worse, the police arrive to arrest Kiryu for some weird ass law that says it's illegal to beat people up. In all seriousness though, they're putting him into protective custody. Why? Well, to make a long story short, similar to how the Tojo reacted to Tadada's death, if they also lost Kiryu on top of that, they probably would have went ballistic. So the police got proactive and headed off the headache by placing an Osakan cop by the name of Kaoru Sayama in charge of Kiryu's protection. Kaoru is an interesting person to be in charge of Kiryu's well-being, seeing as she hates Yakuza with a burning passion. And yet, Kaoru wouldn't stop harassing her boss Besho into being Kiryu's protector. Why? Well, that's a question for later on, as she takes Kiryu away from Omi HQ. From here, the two search high and low both Osaka and Kamurocho to solve their respective problems, opening up the game allowing you to do the normal Yakuza biz. But seeing as most of it's the same, let's go through them at lightning speed. Sub-stories are back and the writing here feels stronger than usual, giving me an even greater sense of the funny ha-has while still being incredibly heartwarming. My personal favorites are the one where a punk tries to force Kiryu to listen to his mixtape, and Yakuza Sunset, which managed to hit a couple of chords that I as a content creator managed to struggle with when making videos, and sends a really good message to learn from failures instead of being defeated by them. Moving on from the sub-stories, the Cabaret Club is back, and is shamelessly lifted from its incarnation in Zero with no notable changes gameplay-wise, which is exactly how I wanted it. Aesthetically though, the Cabaret Club has received a few changes, with the most notable of them, at least for me, being the girls the RGG team chose to use this time around, some of them being Jav models who I managed to recognize almost immediately, and I'm not proud of that statement. In terms of things that are new, we have toilets, which you can only use after you drank something, in which you can use your urine to play, and a photo minigame in which you take pictures of women and talk to them. I don't have anything to say about these two, they never really caught my interest, other than that they are very Japanese and, while odd, are not unexpected. The music this time around is great and has some toe-tapping tracks that honestly blow my mind. Outlaw's Lullaby in particular being outstanding, bringing some big band music into my casual street fights was an amazing decision, and I'll probably be suffering from auditory withdrawal when this is all over. Now, as for the combat, Kiwami 2 shakes things up quite a bit from the new Norm Zero introduced. Being made on the same engine as Yakuza 6, Kiwami 2 sports the new Dragon engine, which, alongside making the game look drop dead gorgeous, makes the experience of walking around Kamurocho and Osaka more immersive by removing loading screens when you enter shops and invisible walls when you get into fights, allowing you to go anywhere at any time in any situation so long as it's not a story event. This allows the overworlds in Kiwami 2 to have a sense of flow unlike the previous two titles. However, while the Dragon engine strives to provide this immersive experience, it doesn't always hit the mark, as the overworld can take a second to properly load in. Thankfully, this isn't something that's too common in the game, happening once or twice if my memory serves me correctly, and it only took about a second to fix itself, but obviously it doesn't help the game in what it's trying to achieve. Now, unfortunately, this new sense of immersion manages to bleed its way into the combat system, as it too has received numerous changes since Kiwami 1. Aside from the aforementioned ability to run around the entire map whenever you want, one of the biggest changes made to Kiwami 2's combat is what happens when an enemy blocks Kiryu's attack, in which Kiryu acts like he hit a steel beam and suffers an egregious amount of recovery. While I've gotten used to it over the years, on my first playthrough I was genuinely considering putting the game down because of this. It just gave me such a weird feeling of combat whiplash, where at a moment's notice all the flow of the game will suddenly be halted as you sit there waiting for the game to accept your inputs once again. Now, I can confidently say that it doesn't stay this way for long, as there are upgrades that you can get to mitigate or outright smash through this issue. However, while I don't have a problem with the latter, it's the former that really gets my goat. You see, I'm an advocate of upgrades being used to enhance the gameplay and give the player more options to tackle different situations, which in turn makes the game more entertaining to play as a result. However, when you have upgrades that, in this instance, make terrible recovery less terrible, it feels like they knew it controlled bad and made these upgrades to compensate for said controls, which always brings up the question of why have it this way in the first place. Now, the answer is to obviously show us how rusty Kiryu has gotten over the year, but honestly, if you're going to do that, I'd rather you take my upgrades than mess with the flow of combat, because once that's in shambles, it's hard to get invested in any kind of interesting mechanics the game may have to offer. Thankfully, I can say that blocking is the only part of combat that feels off, as everything else runs as smooth as butter, albeit at the cost of style style switching. Now, I don't know why, but the RGG team decided to do away with the, at the time, recently implemented style switching mechanic to design a new combat system that's, in a sense, more in line with the rest of the series. I admit I was disheartened by this development when playing Kiwami 2 for the first time. Style switching was just so freeform and enabled so many possibilities that I couldn't help but be sour with its removal. But over time, I managed to find a lot of fun with this combat system. Most of that fun coming from the brand new mode introduced in Yakuza 6 actually, called Extreme Heat Mode. Activated by pressing R2 whenever you have 2 bars of heat, Extreme Heat Mode puts you into the equivalent of Beast Style, giving you an asinine amount of armor frames and having Kiryu pick up a weapon automatically when attacking. Extreme Heat Mode only lasts as long as your heat gauge, and while initially underwhelming considering that it's Beast Mode with a timer, the true use of Extreme Heat Mode lies in its heat usage, as once active, you have access to an arsenal of new heat actions. I use the phrase seem underwhelming because for some reason the game straight up doesn't tell you that Extreme Heat Mode has any more heat actions than the ones you get off of doing regular combos. While I admit finding new heat actions out of the blue is one of the most appealing things about the Yakuza games to me, I wish there was some kind of indication to tell the player that Extreme Heat Mode is what you needed to access the more, for lack of a better term, niche heat actions. As in my case, I ignored Extreme Heat Mode on my first playthrough, which caused me to think that they scaled back on the heat actions, which I can now say after finally using Extreme Heat Mode was definitely not the case. On the topic of heat, Kiwami 2 removes climax heat actions and replaces them with Feel the Heat segments, which are once again boss exclusive heat actions that come up automatically when a boss is about to kick the bucket, rather than in the middle of the fight. This is supposed to be less intrusive, but in all honesty, I felt that it was more intrusive than the climax heat breather stance. This may be caused by the fact that I've played Kiwami 2 less times than Kiwami, but for some reason I never remember that when a boss reaches the last eighth of their health bar, Feel the Heat kicks in and finishes off the boss. This is also a minor nitpick, but there's only 4 finishers with Feel the Heat, and while cool looking, they do get repetitive after a while. By the way, since I haven't already mentioned it, Kiwami 2 runs at 30 frames a second instead of 60 like Zero and Kiwami, which I admit is a bit jarring at first, but not something that ruins the game for me. I mean, if anything, it just makes Tiger Drop a little harder to pull off. I think now's a good enough time to mention that Kiwami 2 has ragdoll physics, and they're hilarious, as whenever Kiryu smacks a thug around, they have a chance to act like they're on the moon and launch themselves into the stratosphere. Again, it doesn't help the game out in terms of realism, but I find it infinitely more entertaining to recreate the moon landing with my bare hands. Also, while I'm at it, the ragdoll physics act as a nerf to Kiryu's grabs, as now they're AoE based instead of single target. So if you grab someone while they're near a wall and they hit said wall, they'll fly right out of your hands, which is realistic, but it's annoying. Another thing that received changes in Kiwami 2 is how you level up, trading out the experience bar for 5 different color-coded orbs that all gain experience points individually depending on what activity you decide to do. From playing arcade games to singing karaoke, literally everything you do builds to these orbs getting more experience. And while you can gain experience from goofing off, they will only give you peanuts in comparison to the various other things you can do in the game. For example, the main and sub-stories are still one of the best ways to receive experience, however sub-stories in particular give you 2 separate payouts per completion. But the God King method of grinding in Kiwami 2 is undisputably eating. Because of the amount of experience you gain per meal, alongside bonus experience you get from eating certain foods together, alongside another bonus experience you get when you finish a restaurant's menu, eating yourself into a food coma is better than literally doing anything else in the game. Now, there are a few complexities to eating, as while you can gain experience from eating, not all food, aka junk food, is worth eating, as eating from restaurants that give you a balanced meal will net you more experience. On top of that, there's a limit to how much you can eat, as if you go above Kiryu's limit, you won't gain any experience at all. In order to lower the food in Kiryu's stomach, he has to work out the food he just ate, and the best exercise in the game is fighting thugs. All in all, I really like this new upgrade system and how it ties into everything you do to progress with your upgrades. It can at points be a little cumbersome, specifically when you're trying to level up the purple orb, but even then, it's not that big a deal in the long run, again because you can choose which food to eat and do activities to increase the orb's progress. Now, just like Kiwami Kiwami 2 takes it upon itself to expand the story and flesh out some aspects that were left hanging in the air, this time around focusing its attention on Yakuza 0, giving closure to all the relationships Majima started but never properly ended. This is primarily done in its own separate mode called Majima Story, which, in events that take place before the story, explain how Majima stopped a war between the Tojo and the Omi by taking responsibility for one of his subordinates who were killing top Omi officers and disbands his whole clan, and using his men to become a construction crew to build a landmark builder than the Millennium Tower called Kamurocho Hills in West Park. During Majima's search for his subordinate, he's forced to travel back to Osaka, where he encounters the friends and rivals he met in Zero. But of all the faces Majima runs into, nothing could prepare him for meeting her again.
本日担当する立山誠です。よろしくお願いします。
Thinking of hitting up one of his subordinates' favorite massage parlors to see if anyone's heard of him, Majima encounters Makoto Tateyama, who, despite the new last name, is the same formerly blind woman from Yakuza 0. The only real major change is that now, she's married to a man whose name I couldn't be bothered remembering. Well, that doesn't really matter, as Makoto has moved on, and Majima plans on keeping it that way, getting an entire massage without so much as saying a word to her, leading to a pretty hilarious massage scene. Ultimately though, this scene serves as a way to have Majima give Makoto a proper goodbye, as he learns by listening to one of her employees that she's leaving for America tomorrow due to her husband's job. Majima, being the secret sweetheart that he is, decides to get her a going away gift in the form of wristbands for her grandfather's watch, which Makoto mentioned during the massage had deteriorated over the years, forcing her to get modern wristbands which clash with the old design. Upon opening up the gift, Makoto tears up, realizing that after all these years, she finally got to see Majima again, ending the Majima saga. I'll be honest, when I first saw Makoto appear on screen, my heart sank, as I was worried that the writers would somehow find a way to ruin the perfectly bittersweet ending Zero gave us. But, to my surprise, they play in line with that ending, reaffirming that the decision Majima made was the best one for Makoto's happiness. It's short, it's sweet, and it's faithful, which is all I can ask for. But that's not all there is to it, as if you invite Majima to sing karaoke, he puts on a song that basically professes his love to Makoto. I didn't actually expect Majima to express his feelings for Makoto, much less in song form, and honestly, it kinda broke me. I may not want Majima and Makoto to get together, but damn if I don't want Majima to be genuinely happy instead of just being content with his life. I want the sad clown to turn that frown upside down, but so long as it comes at someone else's safety, it will never be. I will say though, the one complaint I do have is how Majima controls in this section, because wow is he basic. In terms of everything, Majima simply didn't get as much time put into him as Kiryu, so he's extremely basic, with the only unique aspect to him being that he fights with a knife. He can't access extreme heat mode, I think he has 2 or 3 heat actions max, and he has no counters to speak of, leading for a very dry gameplay experience, which is not something I ever thought I'd say when it came to the series. At the very least, it's only 2 to 3 hours long, so I can understand the lack of polish due to every other aspect of the game getting some major elbow grease in terms of visuals, but yeah, as of writing this is the lowest point in the series' gameplay for me, which is kind of a good thing when you think about it, seeing how this isn't a main story title I'm talking about, but it doesn't save it nonetheless. Majima's role in the game isn't done yet, as Kiwami 2 also brings Majima's construction company into the gameplay mix, in a new side event that was introduced in Yakuza 6 known as Clan Creator. Long story short, thanks to some construction wrestlers named Muta and Chono looking to move in on Majima's construction project by destroying his equipment, making the project too costly, and forcing Majima to sell out to them to escape the money hole. Not wanting to give in to them, Majima asks Kiryu for help. However, he doesn't want Kiryu to fight with them, but instead guide them, as while Majima's construction company has no trouble trouncing their goons, they often get too into the battle and as a result let stragglers destroy their equipment. All Kiryu needs to do is to give a shout when he sees someone gunning for their equipment, and this translates into gameplay in a very interesting way. These construction battles end up being, for lack of a better term, a real-time strategy game where you deploy your crew to hold down the fort, notify them when equipment is being attacked, and command them to use special moves like heal allies or buff the party. Now, even though you're supposed to be strategizing second by second, I found it very easy to turn off my brain and play reactionary without putting much thought into it. For what it's worth, I did complete Majima Construction on my first time through, and had fun while doing it. But for this video, I couldn't bring myself to accomplish that again, unlike the Cabaret Club, which I carved out literal hours just to do again. Now, it should be stated that Clan Creator can be played online with other people, but I can't comment on this at all since I own the PlayStation 4 version of Kiwami 2, and the PSN store wants to charge me $10 a month just to play online. And in my opinion, that's a lot of money for a single section of a video, so unfortunately, unless I get the Steam version, I'll never know how good this is, but maybe someone in the comment section can fill me in on how this all works. And speaking of a single section of the video, as far as combat goes, I'm all tapped out of things to talk about. So, what do you say we get back into the story and wrap that up as well? So after Kaoru parks her car for a full minute, she gets shot in the arm by a sniper. While Kitty wants to take her to the hospital, Kaoru says it's too far away and instead suggests a bar by the name of Aoi, Osaka's version of Serena, which, once inside, he meets the owner of the bar, Tamio, aka Kaoru's mother figure, who takes her in and patches her up. Right before Kitty leaves to search on any leads on the sniper, Kaoru tells him to visit a shady man in a mahjong parlor who will fill him in on which faction hired the sniper based on the bullet. After sinking $1,000,000 yen into his pocket, the shady man reveals that the bullet came from none other than Takashima, a high-ranking member of the Omi Alliance who earlier was advocating alongside Kiryu for peace. But before Kiryu can get anything more out of the shady men, they find out a bounty's been placed on his head, changing their tune quickly. After watching the shady men, Kiryu gets sidetracked for 6 hours in cabaret nonsense. Kiryu then returns to Aoi where he overhears Kaoru talking to Tamio about how the Tojo clan were responsible for the deaths of her parents, and how she's using Kiryu to get closer to the clan so she can figure out their secrets. Kiryu intentionally fumbles about to let the two know that he's present, and once Kiryu enters the room, Kaoru gets a call from her boss Besho telling Kiryu to head back up to Kamurocho as the cars that were tailing just crossed the county line to Tokyo, putting them out of their jurisdiction. Despite this news, Kaoru tags along anyways, not wanting to let Kiryu out of her sight. So after making the way to Kamurocho, Kaoru needs to rest up thanks to a fever her bullet wound managed to incite, causing Kiryu to place her inside Serena for the time being, which surprisingly still has electricity despite the year-long lull in payments. I'm going to headcanon that Reina paid her taxes a year in advance because this will bug me all night if I don't. Just as he drops Kaoru off, Kiryu gets a call telling him to show up at the Amano building tomorrow at 1 AM if he wants to rescue Daigo. Knowing that this is a trap, Kiryu makes a beeline to the Tojo clan, informing them of the upcoming war and Daigo's kidnapping. After hearing that Kiryu will meet with a stranger on top of the Amano building, Yuyoi tries to get Shindo, the new leader of the Nishikiyama family, to give Kiryu some backup, seeing as the Amano building is in his territory, but Shindo refuses, saying that he's pretty sore about Kiryu killing Nishikiyama last year. Kiryu pokes at the idea how it's funny that Daigo's captors happen to go into the one place in Kamurocho where he couldn't get help from, but he leaves it alone for the time being as he has more important matters to deal with, such as the Tojo clan's shortage on officers. Long story short, thanks to last year's events, the Tojo clan is still on shaky grounds, losing quite a number of officers in the war, and not helping is the recent disbandment of the Majima family, who next to the Nishikiyama family had the most men in the Tojo clan. To shore this up, Kiryu plans on talking to Majima and getting him to join up with the Tojo clan once again, but before he does, he visits Serena to check on Kaoru and address the conversation he stumbled upon earlier, warning her that if she tries to dig up the past, it may only cause her pain. To which Kaoru brushes off, saying that he sounds like a man who knows his past quite well. Deciding to continue on anyways, regardless of Kaoru's attitude, Kiryu meets Majima in Purgatory, and after defeating him in the ring, he joins up. But not before handing me this gem of a line after realizing that Kiryu brought a cop into his secret underground gambling hall. Anyways, now with the Tojo clan secure, Kiryu focuses his attention on getting Daigo back, making his way up to the top of the Amano building where he finds Date and his new partner Kawada alongside two Kazukis. To give a bit of context, way earlier in the story, Date and Kawada were called down to Tokyo PD to be given a job of investigating Kazuki, who the police suspect is involved with the Korean mafia as well as Ryuji. Through pressuring him at Stardust, the two track him down to the Amano building, only to find that there are two of them, leading them to believe that one of them is a Korean imposter who took the identity of Kazuki, while the other has been held hostage on top of the Amano building. It takes no time for Kawada to call out the imposter, recognizing his voice from Stardust, but Date knows Kawada has killed for less and stops him from acting hastily, which distracts the two long enough for the Korean Kazuki to whip out his gun, shooting both Kawada and Kazuki. Thankfully, Kaoru manages to handle the situation, murdering the fake Kazuki and unfortunately attracting the cops, which causes the crew to scatter. Kiryu dumps Kazuki off at an underground doctor, but the moment he does, Koreans pop up to check to see which Kazuki survived, which Kiryu deals with, and Kawada manages to scare one of the men into saying the title of their organization, the Jingwean Mafia. The Jingwean Mafia are a relatively unknown group according to Kawada who value loyalty above all things. It should be noted that all of this was told to Kawada in Korean, which immediately gets everyone curious as to why he conveniently knows the language. However, they don't have the time to explore this avenue, as Date explains that ever since they arrived, the barkeep has been entering and exiting the bar, and he just found pictures of both Kiryu and Kaoru behind the counter. Kiryu decides to handle this one alone, finding out after clobbering him that thanks to the events of last year, the barkeep's business has nosedived, and as a result, gained a large amount of debt. Recently, however, Sengoku, the peanut gallery from earlier, approached him promising to make the debt go away if he killed the two people in the photos. Finally getting to put a name to the person who put the bounty on his head, Kiryu forgives the barkeep from trying to kill him since he sees the events of last year's as his fault, despite the fact that he actually did nothing wrong. But whatever. From here, Sengoku and Ryuji interchange plays, with both of them managing to convince ex-Omi officers and supposedly loyal members of the Tojo clan to start a ruckus in Kamurocho. While Ryuji is doing this purely so they don't find Goda, Sengoku takes advantage of the chaos to eliminate some Tojo officers, leaving the clan with even less than they already had. And on top of this, the cops get interested in arresting Date for the murder of Korean Kazuki, as thanks to security cam footage, they saw Date's gun being pointed at the imposter when he was shot. However, Date never shot his gun, as it was Kaoru's bullet from off-screen that killed him. The camera footage does yield something good for the gang, as it manages to jog Kiryu's memory of the florist, who after visiting and having Kaoru save his servers from an undercover Jingwean member through her magical anti-hack powers, the two manage to find and rescue Daigo. Unfortunately, Daigo doesn't know where Goda is being held, but he does tell the group that the Jingwean aren't a normal street gang, handling their guns similar to military. It becomes increasingly apparent that everyone needs more information on the Jingwean, and thanks to Kashiwagi inviting himself on the conversation to check on Daigo, the group is able to better understand their new enemy. Long story short, back in the 80s, Kamurocho was on the verge of being overrun by the Jingwean. The Jingwean back then being quite the group, looting and beating civilians left, right, and sideways, turning Kamurocho into a proper hellhole. Despite everyone and their grandmothers knowing it was the Jingwean causing this mess, the cops didn't have any concrete evidence to go in and throw the book at them, leaving the cleanup job to the Dojima family. Or more specifically, Kazuma and Shimano, the former of whom wasn't down with the plan as he tried to convince Sohei and Shimano to take another route. But they never paid him much mind thanks to the unparalleled destruction the Jingwean brought in their wake. However, we now know that the raid was anything but complete, as 20 years after the fact, the Jingwean have popped back up and have now sided themselves with Ryuji to create one of the most intimidating enemy factions I've ever encountered in a video game. In Kashiwagi's explanation of the Jingwean, he also mentions a detective who was working on the case, but thanks to time he's forgotten the man's name, leading them into a dead end. Or at least it would be if Date and Kawada hadn't taken it upon themselves to break into Tokyo PD's record room and dig up the case file for the Jingwean Mafia. While Date has a hard time finding what he needs, Kawada immediately points him in the right direction, finding out that the two detectives on the Jingwean case were Kawada and Besho. Once again, Date doesn't get much time to press Kawada about this, as Kawada tosses him his badge before leaving the scene. Date then relays this information to Kiryu and Kaoru, the latter of whom gets particularly pissy at the news, as she can't believe that her boss would hide something from her. This gets Kaoru's side set back on Osaka, with Kiryu on the other hand being perfectly fine letting her go, seeing as he still needs to find Goda, but Kaoru holds him at gunpoint, forcing him to come along with. At Osaka PD, after pulling Besho to the side, he co-signs everything they heard. Kaoru still can't believe it, saying that a cop should never rely on Yakuza, but Besho retorts by saying that at the time, there was no other way to stop the bloodshed. Amidst the emotions, Besho does let out some interesting information, saying that the Jingwean were a 36-man outfit and they only found 33 bodies. Of the 3 remaining survivors, Besho only knows where one of them is currently located, and points the two in the direction of a mahjong parlor called Keima, where they'll find a man named Murai. But before he's done, Besho relieves Kaoru of her protective custody over Kiryu, his reasoning being that the Jingwean are too dangerous and shouldn't be trifled with, which, once again, gets her all pissy as she storms out of the room. Kiryu tries to figure out if Kawada's history with murders is somehow tied to the Jingwean, but Besho brushes his question to the side, asking him to look after Kaoru until she cools down. Kiryu complies, and what follows is a night of gallivanting in which the two manage to form a really cute relationship, especially so for someone who hates Yakuza with a burning passion. The next day, when the two meet up, Kaoru tells Kiryu that she suspects that she's a Jingwean survivor. Why did she think this? Well, seeing as her parents died 20-something years ago, and that the Dojima family had massacred the Jingwean 20-something years ago, she thinks there might be a connection. It's a bit of a stretch, but considering that this is the one lead she's got the whole adventure, Kaoru decides to stick with it as the two head towards Keima. At Keima, Kaoru tries to get Murai to talk about the Jingwean, but he refuses to say anything. That is, until he hears how Kaoru suspects that she is the daughter of a Jingweon member, which gets Murai to spill the beans. Murai starts his story by correcting what Besho said, saying that while yes, there were 36 members of the Jingweon, there were 2 other people unaffiliated with the Jingweon that were with them during the night of the raid, being the leader's wife and child who we saw Kawada rescue in the intro. He then adds when the Jingweon members from the mainland came looking for him, he ended up giving up those 2 in order to save himself. When Kaoru hears that there was a child with the leader's wife, she's instantly convinced that it was her and gets angrier than ever, chiding out Murai for his cowardice as she then asks him what happened to the husband. Murai tells Kaoru of how he saw her father gunned down on Christmas, but understandably he didn't catch the name of the man who did him in, only knowing that the assailant had a very thick mustache. However, with this newfound information, Kiryu manages to deduce that the killer was Kazuma. The moment Kiryu figures it out, Jingweon members flood into the room, murdering the bystanding mahjong players, all to get to Murai. While Kiryu and Kaoru manage to protect themselves, they can't say the same for Murai, whose stomach catches the sharp end of a knife, which doesn't kill him instantly. However, due to the horror he caused in the past, he shoves the knife further in, killing himself on his own terms. And just to make sure they don't get any more information out of them, the remaining Jingweon members down some kind of substance, killing them immediately. As Kiryu tries to pull Kaoru out of Kema before anything worse happens, he then goes on to explain his side of the story, telling Kaoru that he too was there on the night of the raid. Taking note of the fact that Kazuma had broken his tradition of visiting the kids at Sunflower during Christmas, Kiryu made a trip down to Kamurocho to see if everything was alright, only to get a cold and dismissive response for his concern. Knowing that something was up, Kiryu followed Kazuma to the Jingweon HQ, where he saw the leader of the Jingweon hold Kazuma at gunpoint. In reality, Kazuma was convincing the leader to take his remaining men and flee before Shimano got to them, but in Kiryu's case, he didn't pay attention to the words, looking for the nearest weapon he could find and busting in on the room to save his foster father. As a result, Kazuma shot the leader of the Jingweon, knowing that he wouldn't have hesitated to shoot Kiryu, looping us back into the intro. Kaoru tries to leave, but Kiryu questions why she doesn't shoot him, causing her to chide him out, saying that life isn't so black and white and that murdering him won't erase what he's done. As Kaoru leaves, Kiryu stews on what she said, getting so wrapped up in thought that he doesn't move for literal hours until a bystander's bottle ends up rolling up to his leg. When Kiryu bends down to pick up the bottle, the bystander oh no. Struggling to get back to his feet, Kiryu decides it's a good idea to remove the knife from his gut as he hobbles back to Aoi, catching a glimpse of Tamio talking to Kawada just before he passes out. When Kiryu wakes up, Kawada is nowhere to be seen, Tamio saying that he paid a visit to see how Kaoru was doing and immediately changes the subject by handing Kiryu a note that she said she found in his jacket pocket that came from Sengoku. The note from Sengoku simply states that he has Haruka, which brings Kiryu into action despite the gaping hole in his stomach. After beating his way through Sengoku's ground assassins, Kiryu makes his way to Sengoku's hideout, Osaka Castle, which is inside Osaka Castle. Anyways, Kiryu manages to earn Tiger Drop's namesake by cold clocking 2 tigers alongside the rest of Sengoku's men. When Kiryu finally makes his way to Sengoku, he finds Ryuji waiting in Sengoku's office, disgusted with how his fellow Omi member was going to use a child to bait Kiryu into coming here, and straight up stabs Sengoku and kicks him off the balcony to his own HQ. By the way, Haruka sees all of this and has no discernible reaction to murder happening right before her eyes, and it's one of my favorite things about the scene. Like, I've talked about how ridiculously mature Haruka is for her age, but being stone-faced in the praise of death honestly takes the cake. I know Haruka has been through a lot as of last game, but I didn't think it was enough to completely blink off another person dying in front of her. Like, that's something I expect from the adults of this series, not a child who got exposed to this stuff for like a week. But I digress. Ryuji returns Haruka to Kiryu, telling him that the day after tomorrow is when the war is going to go down, as he makes his way out of the room, allowing Kiryu to stop putting on a brave face and double over from his stab wound from earlier. Thankfully, Kaoru arrives at the last minute to help him out, as Kawada watches from the distance. When they all return to Aoi to patch up Kiryu, Kaoru notices a note left by Tamio saying not to blame Kiryu for her parents' death and that her father is still alive, and understandably, Kaoru goes out to look for her. This gives both Kiryu and Haruka the opportunity to explore Osaka together and address her numerous kidnappings in an extremely heartfelt way, where Kiryu tries to push Haruka into the idol industry so she can be clear of him and any potential kidnappings, but Haruka tells Kiryu that being around him makes her feel safe because she knows that he'll rescue her. It's a really cute scene between between the two of them that informs Kiryu that he shouldn't ignore how Haruka feels just because it would make her safe. Unfortunately, this nice air doesn't last long, as the moment Kiryu and Haruka return, they get a call from Kudahashi, the chief of foreign affairs, and the man that hired both Date and Kawada, saying that he is a member of the Jingweon and that they are holding Date hostage until the two remaining members who took part in the Dojima family raid 26 years ago, along with Kaoru, arrive in Millennium Tower before dawn. Despite calling them to Millennium Tower, Kudahashi will take any opportunity to see them dead, as he calls upon his fellow Jingweon members to ambush Kiryu and Kaoru on the highway. This gives Kiryu the perfect opportunity to demonstrate his non-lethal truck tactics. I'd like to take this time to point out that Kiryu has never killed a man, by the way, and that's not changing tonight because that guy is still surprisingly alive. When the trio and Tamio arrive at Millennium Tower, Kawada takes control of the situation almost immediately. Despite being on his hind legs, Kudahashi isn't out of tricks just yet, asking Kawada if he can really kill someone in front of his own daughter. This provokes a response from Kaoru, which distracts Kawada long enough for Kudahashi to pull a hidden gun out and shoot Kawada. Kaoru stops his assault by brandishing her gun, which allows Kiryu to run in and do his thing, while Kaoru covers him from armed Jingweon members. When Kudahashi finally hits the floor, Kiryu runs over to untie the hostages, while Kaoru watches over the downed Jingweon. But somehow, despite being right in front of her, Kudahashi manages to pull out another hidden gun and gets ready to blast her. Fortunately, Kawada body blocked the bullet at the last second and uses Kaoru's gun to kill Kudahashi dead. However, he won't be too far behind him, thanks to bullets suddenly being introduced into his diet. And in his final moments, he tells Kaoru of the life he had with her mother Soo-yun and how she died, saying that after the raid, he brought her out to Osaka to escape the heat, and within time, they had Kaoru giving up on the other child somewhere down the line. While they're all curious on what happened to the kid, Kawada won't and doesn't have the time to go into detail, continuing on by saying they all lived happily until Kawada got a post change to Hong Kong, which Soo-yun encouraged he pursue, which gave the Jingweon the perfect opportunity to move in and kill her. Thankfully, Soo-yun had the foresight to leave Kaoru at the care of Tamio before the Jingweon closed in on her, and when Kawada got a hold of the news, he not only decided to stay away from Kaoru in case the Jingweon were looking at him, but he went on a murder spree to suppress the influx of Jingweon members coming into Japan. Unfortunately though, he ended up pulling Kaoru right back into it by checking on Tamio, which got her to overhear how the Dojima family ruined her life. After finishing his story, Kawada passes on holding his daughter's hand, which of course causes Kaoru to cry at this development. Thankfully, something good came out of this, as Date managed to swipe a disc off of Kudahashi's corpse before the cops arrived. Unfortunately, they are incapable of getting anything off of it with the hardware of a hobo camp, so Kaoru takes the disc to Osaka PD to use his supercomputer to crack the code. Before Kaoru leaves, she and Kiryu have a heart-to-heart on how he was right in digging up the past only bringing about pain. But Kiryu manages to take away some of that pain thanks to his essence of face suck, which manages to snap her out of her funk. In the meanwhile, as Kaoru leaves Kamurocho, Kazuki wakes up with something important to say, informing Kiryu that while he was being held captive, he heard the Jingweon members speak about destroying Kamurocho with bombs, one for every Jingweon member that was killed in the raid. With the first bomb that went off in Millennium Tower and the one Kudahashi had, that leaves 31 bombs remaining. And with such a high amount, Date tries to contact the police to hopefully get the bomb squad on this, while Kiryu and Daigo scrounge with the few remaining Tojo clan members they have to head off Ryuji's assault. Unfortunately, things don't go smoothly for them as the police decide to sit this one out, not wanting to take advice from a wanted man, leaving the team significantly underskilled. With no time left to waste, Kiryu decides to shift the positions of the Tojo clan members from defend to search and disarm, while he alone deals with the Go-Ryu clan. Given the constraints, nobody tries to talk him out of it, and thanks to Majima getting the Flores' old base up and running, they're able to track down the location of the bombs. While the bomb search is going on, Kiryu wipes the floor with the Go-Ryu clan, making his way to Stardust where he finds more of them beating up on Yuya, with Ryuji watching from above using Yuya as bait to draw out Kiryu. While Kiryu manages to defeat the grunts, all the fighting he's been doing is catching up to him, leaving him winded while Ryuji has yet to lift a finger, and despite unsheathing that katana of his, he decides to spare Kiryu's life again. Once again, Ryuji's sense of pride comes into the mix, this time mirroring Kiryu's earlier statement on how finishing him off now would be unfair since his men tired him out, making it so that he couldn't take the victory without it feeling hollow. On top of that, Ryuji also wants Kiryu to save Kamurocho since he plans on taking it over when he wins and sees no reason to let it go up in smoke, especially since now the Jingweon are acting completely on their own. Before Ryuji leaves, he tells Kiryu that when he's done with the bombs, to come to Kamurocho Hills so that they can finally settle this feud. Seeing as the next time I talk about him in a story relevant sense is going to be the finale, I figure that now's as good a time as ever to talk about Ryuji as a character. I find it a bit hard to put into words why exactly I like Ryuji. On the one hand, he's a straightforward idiot who has no ulterior motive, wanting to kill Kiryu for clout. But I think it's because of his idiocy is why I like him so much. As much as Ryuji tries to be a big bad Yakuza, he has a lot of softy moments where his pride, morals, or respect for someone else come into play. And while he could have achieved his goal 9 times over if he just forgoed those things he cared about, he doesn't and stays true to himself. While not nearly as cunning as a Jingweon, Ryuji's stupidity ends up coloring his character in a way that despite knowing that he's the bad guy, I can't help but love him, which is obviously a great thing to say for a character who was introduced in this very game. Well, anyways, after fending off the Goryu clan, the Tojo clan, despite being underskilled, manages to disarm all 31 bombs. And while that was happening, Kaoru manages to crack the code on Kurahashi's disc, finding out something that causes her to be taken aback by it. What is it? Well, we don't know, at least not until Date, who sometime off screen made a copy of Kurahashi's disc and managed to crack the code by handing it to Pseudo, breaks the news to Kiryu that not only are Ryuji and Kaoru related, but they were birthed by the same woman. Kaoru literally arrives seconds after this revelation, feigns ignorance on cracking the code, and after hearing that Kiryu was getting ready to fight Ryuji, starts making a big fuss about the event, threatening to arrest Kiryu if he goes through with it, despite the fact that she knew that this was going to happen the whole game. When Kiryu refuses to back down, Kaoru begins to accept it, but before the fight, she wants him to visit Tokyo PD, as Besho had just arrived in town and has something to tell him. Date, for some reason, accompanies Kiryu despite being a wanted man, but it doesn't take long for the two to find out that Kaoru had just put them on a wild goose chase, leaving behind a recorded message telling them that she knows that Ryuji is her brother and is going to try and talk him out of this war, hoping her blood ties mean something to him. But before the message is over, she admits that she loves Kiryu and that she regrets letting him in like she did. But now, thanks to him, she's ready to face her fate, whatever that entails. Kiryu fumes at her statement as he then takes it out on a crowd of Jingweon members who are blocking his way into Kamurocho Hills. And once he gets to the top, he sees Kaoru managing to get through to Ryuji, which is then compounded by Chairman Goda, who by the way was being held on top of Kamurocho Hills the whole time, as he then goes into how he became Ryuji's foster father. Long story short, after Kawada brought Tsuyon into the Sotenbori, she met Goda in a bar in which she divulged her whole life story to him. And knowing that at any moment her life could end, Goda took her and Ryuji in to protect them from harm. However, when Kawada came looking for Tsuyon, she left him at the drop of a hat, despite Goda's feelings for her. However, she left Ryuji behind due to Goda's merciless begging, as he saw Ryuji like a son and didn't want to see him leave. Ryuji doesn't falter from the story, still wanting to fight Kiryu, and Kiryu willingly obliges, saying that Ryuji reminds him of an old friend who fought to change his life, and a man like that deserves everything he's got. Within no time, Kiryu defeats Ryuji, however with his defeat comes a load of twists and turns that are enough to weave a friggin' basket, with the first of them being the return of Terada, or rather the return of Dejin Kim. That's right, not only did Terada fake his death, but he's also a member of the Jingweon, using his death to bait the actions and responses from Kiryu and the Yomi Alliance to weed out the final participating members in the Dojima family raid. And now with the final players in their places, the Jingweon plan to kill them all and set off the final bomb, this one being created rather recently thanks to the death of Kurahashi. Kiryu can't believe Terada, as since he spared his life in the raid, Kazuma has been bending backwards just to keep him afloat, even going so far as to ask Goda to keep a watchful eye over him when Terada entered the Yomi Alliance. But Terada isn't having any of it, starting another brawl which ends with Terada and the remaining Jingweon falling to the floor. With Terada finally out, everything is... Never mind, Kiryu just got shot in the back by Takashima. Unlike Terada, however, who gave Kiryu leeway to speak, Takashima takes advantage of the fact that he's holding a gun and lights up both Kiryu and Goda, all the while disarming Kaoru of her gun. And just when everything seems to be clear cut from here on out, Takashima shoots Terada, causing him to drop a cylindrical object. Why? Well, it's because Takashima has big plans for him and only him, concocting this whole scheme so that he can become the next chairman of the Yomi Alliance with the power of the Jingweon Mafia at his side. And with this newfound power, he'll absorb the Tojo clan and have unparalleled power over Japan's Yakuza. However, despite his carefully devised plan, he is overturned by Terada, who activates the bomb in his final moments, asking Kiryu to trust him strangely enough, and Ryuji, who charges at him with the power of his silverback ancestors and delivers my favorite line in the whole game.
お前みたいなバカに裏をかかれるとは。男はのバカなくらいでちょうどええんや。我のような計算高い男は所詮天下など取れんのや。
I am glad that above everything else in Kiwami 2, that the straightforward idiot ended up outliving the far more cunning and underhanded Jingweon members. Unfortunately, thanks to his straightforwardness, he can now barely stand, let alone catch his breath, thanks to Takashima shooting him full of holes. With no time left to think, Ryuji sends Kaoru down the freight elevator, finally acknowledging the fact that he has a sister and is glad to have finally met her. Now, with no more distractions, the two men have their final battle, with Kiryu ending up the victor while Ryuji lays limp on the floor. Making her way back to the top, Kaoru runs over to Ryuji to hear his final word. As he states, she looked just like their mom, who, whenever she smiled, looked great. So Ryuji asks Kaoru to give him that image once more, and as she complies, Ryuji, who has now found happiness, dies. Kiryu, on the other hand, isn't doing so hot either, as thanks to the fight with Ryuji, he no longer has the strength to stand. While Kaoru tries to carry him out of there, he tells her to run, as she retorts by saying she isn't leaving him behind. With these two stubborn fools stuck in an impasse, the both of them decide to give up on leaving and spend the remaining time hugging faces, as Date and Haruka fly in via helicopter yelling at them to run. All of this happens while really auto-tuned J-pop blasts in the background, causing some of the emotion of the scene to get washed out, but I digress. As Date, Haruka, and Tsudo fly away from the bomb, Kiryu and Kaoru hug it out, as the citizens of Kamurocho watch Kamurocho Hills, until the bomb ticks down to 0, ending the game. This is technically the end of Kiwami 2, but in an after credit scene, we see that Kiryu and Kaoru survive without a scratch on them, the bomb turning out to be a dud thanks to Terada removing the fuse, which was a cylindrical object that fell off his person when he died. Date asks Kiryu if the reason he stayed on top of the construction site was because he figured out that the bomb was a dud, but Kiryu denies it, saying that he listened to Terada's last words being "trust him," which he assumes was directed on his loyalty towards Kazuma. With the Jingweon eradicated and Ryuji dead, our heroes visit the grave of Yumi and the others one last time, with Kaoru joining them giving a bouquet of flowers to the departed, ending Kiwami 2. You know, it's funny. I thought I'd have a lot more to say about Kiwami 2 when I got to the end, but as it turns out, I don't. In the end, what I said in this video basically covers up my whole thoughts in the game. While the combat isn't exactly where I want it to be, especially for the earlier parts of the game, everything else is still pretty strong. Not as strong as I once thought, obviously, but still good enough to warrant a playthrough. That being said, at least in my opinion, the story is what you come here for. With so many great characters like Ryuji, Kaoru, and Kiryu's new development in this game, honestly, it's hard to even say anything else in this game comes close to that. Which is great from a story perspective, but seeing as I'm the kind of guy who likes the story and gameplay to be really high up, this doesn't really do much for me. And now that Yakuza's 3 through 5 are available on the PS4 and give me an experience I'm more familiar with, I don't really have much of a reason to come back to Kiwami 2, you know, unless I'm 100% in the game. God help me if I ever try that. With that being said, I guess that's all there is to say. So, thank you all for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you all next time with Yakuza 3. Until then.